The reveals are usually at 9 a.m. And yesterday, oh, here we go. Here we go, guys. You just had to have faith. This is it. No sound as usual, so that's how we know it's a Riot reveal. Okay, calculated creations. Pulling this up so you can see it. Create an armored gearhead Neandroid, so that's going to be a cat, like an internet meme, or ballistic bot in hand. Presumably, you get to choose ballistic bot, 2 mana, round start, create an ignition. So wow, we have to read a lot of these cards. I can't evaluate these without actually read what ignition and what all these are. But yes, this is the new keyword, augment. Let me actually be a proper streamer and show this in a way where you guys can see it. There we go. Sorry, this is like there's no cam space here for me. Let me display this properly. Hang on. I'm figuring this out. This is very weird to try to fit myself here. Okay, ballistic bot. So without knowing what an ignition in hand does, we don't know exactly how this works. But it's the 2 mana spell that has the ability to pull this out. Armed Gearhead, this is Augment and Quick Attack. And this is Neandroid, which is Augment and Elusive. And Ignition, which is deal 1 to the enemy Nexus. Oh man. A lot of things happening very quick. And lastly, we get the landmark for PNZ, Hexcore Foundry. Round start, all players draw 1. So that is pretty funny. So concepts like this have been used a lot in mill decks in other card games. If we have the ability to deck the opponent out to 0, that can be very powerful. This feels like I don't know if we'll have the exact tools for this yet, but if there are some like crazy combo pieces for this, then that could be nuts. And then we got one final card here, Aftershock. Deal 3 to anything or destroy a landmark. Deal 3 to anything or destroy a landmark. Huh. That's interesting. It's not a terrible landmark tech. If there is a landmark heavy meta, you will definitely use this. But outside of the ability to destroy landmarks, it's, 4 damage to deal 3 at slow speed isn't really what you want. Think of it sort of like a gacha that has a sort of different clause, right? It's at slow speed instead of fast. And instead of sometimes costing 2, it has the ability to destroy a landmark. And it can deal phase 2. Yeah, you're right. Unlike gacha, it can deal damage to phase 2. That's a very, 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 very important note. Absolutely huge. So PNZ does have this like burn ability here, which is gigantic. So that this could actually be, at the end of the day, the thing to understand about burn as a concept is that there will always be a spot for burn in the meta, right? It's like a mini decimate. Yeah, exactly. It's like a mini decimate. It can also deal damage to a unit too. Like, the flexibility of this card is really powerful, right? It's sort of similar to Get Excited, except, it costs 1 more mana, you don't have to discard a card, and it can destroy a landmark at slow speed. So overall, it's definitely a card that's on the competitive level. It's not going to be auto-include or anything like that, but it will definitely hit certain decks, 100%. So burn decks, any sort of like potential landmark tech, or just like slower control style stuff. Like you could definitely see running this in some Ezreals and some metas. So now that we've seen these cards, let's back up for a second and look at the other ones we've seen thus far. So the one big question, calculated creations. We don't know exactly how this wording plays. Does this allow you to choose between the 3, or does it give you one randomly? Do we have precedent for assuming one way or another? It's like choose. It should be choose. I would be surprised if it wasn't. So you're basically choosing between Armored, Neandroid, or Ballistic Bot for 2 mana at burst. Watch the video. Is there... What do you mean? Was there a clip of it there that I missed? Oh, was it at the very start? Oh, yeah. The very, very, very start. How did I miss that? Okay, yeah. You guys are right. Let's see choose. So let's go ahead and look at these. Ballistic Bot has Augment. So keep in mind, what Augment means is when you play a created card, it gets +1 attack. And keep in mind, this card that summons it, Calculated Creations, of course, plays and draws created cards, right? So it kind of works with itself. So for 2 spell mana, you can play, I said it's not 2 spell mana. 2 spell mana puts it in the hand, and then you have to put 2 unit mana to be able to play it. But you can play Ignition, or you can play Ballistic Bot, which gives you Ignition every turn. And keep in mind, Ignition, I think, showed at the end here, which is just 1 slow fleeting, deal 1 to the enemy Nexus. But that's a powerful burn tool for like over the top finishes. And on top of that, we have a little bit of the cheese potential. So it's really looking, from what we've seen so far out of these reveals, it seems very much like there is going to be this burn PNZ archetype, right? And part of it is going to be over the top spell burn off of stuff like Ballistic Bot drawing Ignition, and off of stuff like, for example, Aftershock, and even the draw card Hexcar Foundry can be used for that late game burn over the top. But part of it can be based on stuff like elusives getting augmented. Like Neandroid, you could pick sometimes an elusive keyword that you can buff a couple times with augments and just smack the opponent in the face for 4 or maybe more, right? And that's really, really, really powerful. So it looks like PNZ Burn is kind of back, baby. It looks like PNZ Burn is kind of coming back in a big way. Like, we've only seen a few cards so far, but already there's a lot of support for it. A lot of support for it. Calculated Creation looks kind of nuts. The flexibility of this card is pretty insane. Ballistic Bot is pretty solid in general, especially, you know, when we have the ability to get augmented. But the thing to understand, keep in mind, is that Calculated Creations is going to be 2 mana plus whatever, right? It's very similar to Behold the Infinite, if that's the comparison, like a 2 mana spell that generates one of these powerful things, but of course that means it's going to cost you 2 extra mana, right? Which is going to be a pretty big cost. Keep that in mind. You get the flexibility. Sometimes you can get Armed Gearhead, which is augmented quick attack. This one looks weaker. I mean, it's always going to have 1 health and it doesn't have elusive or anything. You can main deck these. They have rarity gems. Okay, interesting. Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. They have the rarity gems as well. All 3 of them do. So all 3 of them are main deckable. If we're looking at the gems, which have been, I think, true in every case in the past. There's been a couple of situations where cards didn't have gems but were main deckable. So all 3 of these are main deckable. We have to evaluate them both as cards that you can get off of Ballistic Bot or cards that you can main deck themselves. And then Neandroid is pretty spooky. I think Neandroid is one of the better cards here. This one I think is actually a little bit scary. Now, the thing to understand about elusives is it really depends on what's happening in the meta at the time. There's a lot of situations where elusives will get kind of like chumped out. If the good decks in the meta are running a lot of stuff like Zap Sprayfin, then elusives gets a lot worse. Or maybe stuff like Hush. But if the good decks in the meta aren't running those, then this card becomes completely insane. So it's a little bit meta dependent, but this card will absolutely hit decks in metas. 100%. 100%. Burn discard is super strong with these cheap drops. Yeah, you can definitely just run, for example, something like this card, Armed Gearhead. Comparing this to a 1-drop, you know, we have to compare it to 1-drops that Burn discard has run in the past. That's going to be stuff like, you know, Precious Pet and Saboteur. This one is actually a bit of a threat with Quick Attack and Augmented. If we're running an Augmented deck, I could definitely see this hitting main deck. It needs support, so we're not sure if it's going to have enough support for that already. But, I mean, all you need to do is create a couple of cards, and this will demand a pretty big answer for a 1-mana card, right? You got to think of this card very similarly to stuff like, for example, not Soul Shepherd, Star Shepherd, or what's the PNZ card? Astute Academic. Cards like that where they've got 1 mana, they gain a lot of attack, and they seem kind of weird because usually they just get blocked out. So it's like, what's the point? I'm getting blocked out anyway, so it's not really like I might have a big attack unit that doesn't even deal face damage. But the thing to remember with these cards is they cost so little. Like, this is a 1-mana card. I'm okay if it gets blocked out every turn. Right? It's going to feel bad if my 5/1 gets blocked out every turn, but if it's a 1-mana 5/1, then who cares, right? So it depends on how much support this deck is going to have, but this card can absolutely be good. Neandroid looks really solid, and Ballistic Bot in and of itself is sweet. Honestly, upon looking at these a little closer, the fact that they're all main deckable, Calculated Creations might have a harder time fitting into these decks. These cards you will want to augment, you will want to create cards, and that's going to give this augmented keyword support. So Calculated Creations, you know, you are buffing your augment cards, but the fact that you're paying 2 extra mana for this looks like it's not going to be worth it. So unless there's extra support for this card, you're probably going to want to main deck these other cards themselves. themselves as opposed to playing calculated creations. The rest of the cards here look pretty good. I'm a little hesitant on the Hexcore Foundry as a landmark because I think it's a little expensive for what it does, but in burn decks or mill decks alike, the ability to draw more cards is going to be good for you. And finally, the last point here before we wrap this up is to go back, look at the augment keyword. Again, the augment keyword is all about being able to, when you play a created card, so when you play from hand to the board a card that was not in your deck but created by something else, the cards with augmented permanently gain 1 attack. So what that means is we're going to want to look and think about cards that are currently in the card pool that have really good synergy points with the augment keyword, okay? The first things that immediately come to mind in this category are Poro Cannon is going to be absolutely huge. Poro Cannon, of course, does really, really well with this kind of strategy, right? Because with Poro Cannon, why is the volume not on? Hang on. Oh, the volume is on. I was just deaf. Okay, so Poro Cannon. This creates 2 non-main decked cards in your hand. These are, you know, Daring Poros, and they're elusive. So they synergize with the kind of cheesy augment plus attack unblockable burn strategy. This card is completely core there. Then there's going to be cards like here. Let's go with the create. Then there's going to be cards like even Flash of, not Flash of Brilliance. I was thinking Trail of Evidence has been a card that's not really seen play in the past. It's been kind of close to it. But, you know, because it's creating a card that's buffing all the augments, this could absolutely be great, right? We have to be thinking, you know, what other color are we going to want other than P and Z? So let's think about it. You know, gems do really well with this, with stuff like the, Gift Giver or Mountain Goat. Because again, it's the same thing as Daring Poros. Not only do these create cheap cards that you can play, but they give plus attack to your cheesy OTK, elusive plus attack strategy. And I really think that's how we want to build Augment. It's all about giving unblockables this plus attack or sharing keywords. Again, keep in mind there's the new 5 mana card that gives keywords. You can even use give it all unironically could absolutely be used to make something like, you know, you've got that new 1 mana card, the new 1 mana card that augments that we just saw, that can get plus very high plus attack very, very quickly. Right? This can easily get 5 attack. It was the Armed Gearhead. This is the one that can get 5 attack pretty easily. And then all you need is an elusive, and Give It All can be really insane. Not even joking. This deck could easily be able to fit in Give It All. It's a bit of a meta call. You know, in most metas it might not be able to, but it's definitely a consideration. And then there's Draven, of course, which creates spinning axes. So we can see there's a lot of different ways to build this augment idea, right? But I am pretty firm on this one particular aspect, which is it does want to be aggressive and create kind of unblockable or shared keyword situations. That's really how we want to be thinking about this, right? So these are probably the best ways I would say to use it. Vault Breaker looks adorable with this, but I'm pretty sure you're not going to have enough mana to actually play this. And keep in mind, you have to play created cards. According to the augmented keyword, if it is not Riot wording, it wouldn't work with Used Cask Salesman, because it doesn't play created cards, it summons created cards. It needs to play from hands, according to the wording. So those seem to be the biggest ways to use it. Gems, Draven, you know, some of the big ones within PNZ, like Poro Cannon itself. And yeah, that's Fizz could be kind of interesting in a deck like that, although I think there's not going to be there's a few missing pieces to make that work, I think. But that seems to be it for this reveal here. That's kind of my initial thoughts. Looks like there's a lot we can do with this one. I'm personally a big fan of these sort of cheesy style blowout strategies. As long as they're not super mainstream, they're always fun to tinker around with because they feel like even if they're a little bit on the weaker end, they actually have the ability to, steal a lot of games, right? Heimer. Yeah, Heimer as well isn't bad. I don't know if it's exactly the direction these want to go in. I feel like you're probably going to want to play more aggressive with these augments keywords. A lot of them don't really feel like they have Heimer synergy. Heimer's more of like a mid-range spell-oriented deck, so even though he also creates cards in your hands, I don't think it's really playing for the same kind of win condition that these other cards want. Okay, that's it though. That's my initial impressions for today's reveals.